is my pleasure to announce our next speaker, Mr. Zach Ducheneaux. Zach grew up ranching in the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation. He and his family raised beef, cattle, and quarter horses. Throughout his ranching career, he has worked to improve opportunities for Indian producers at home and across the country. He has served on many boards and committees, including the Intertribal Agricultural Council, Northwest Area Foundation, and the ACTCAN, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, CDFI, and perhaps he can elaborate on that for us. He previously served as the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Council representative. He feels the next step in rebuilding reservation food systems is to reinvent agricultural finance. Amen to that as a farmer myself, from the perspective of the producer instead of the bank or shareholders. Help me to welcome Mr. Ducheneaux.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Linda. And thank you to the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community for getting us all together at this and other events like this around the country to help raise the level of discussion about agriculture and food systems in Indian country as a solution to the economic development woes that we see every day when we drive through home. As she mentioned, my name is Zach Ducheneaux. I work for the Intertribal Ag Council. I'm Secretary of the Board of Directors. Also have the honor of serving on Akiptan, that's how you pronounce our CDFI's name, and working towards that reinvention of agriculture finance. We're going to get into that a little bit later. When I was first asked to present here, they wanted me to talk about the Farm Bill, and they're doing such a good job of planning this. That was clear back in June when we had hope that there would be a Farm Bill passed by now. So I said, that's going to be over and done with. Maybe it'd be time to talk about something else and what we're going to do next. They acquiesced to my request, and lo and behold, here we are after the expiration of the previous Farm Bill without a Farm Bill. So I'm just going to give a brief update on where we're at with that, and then I'll go into what the alternate topic that I sent over to them was. The Senate and the House both passed their versions of the Farm Bill. They were, I wouldn't say radically different, but there were significant philosophical differences throughout. The cornerstone of those philosophical differences was SNAP and the work requirements that were proposed by the House, and the elimination of certain conservation programs also proposed by the House of Representatives. So I'll dive into the civic process there just a little bit. When you have two different versions, a conference committee is appointed from the leadership of each of the houses, and they get together and try to negotiate a single bill that can then be represented in each of the houses and signed by the president. We were rolling towards that process there in September, and the wheels kind of came off. The House of Representatives is out now until after the election. So one of two things will happen. We'll either get a lame duck version of those two versions of a farm bill, or they'll go back to the drawing board when the new Congress convenes and start over. While that happens, though, there are certain programs that are critical to Indian country that have expired and have no baseline funding. FDIPR is one of them. Small and socially disadvantaged farmers grants, value-added producer grants, those have all expired. They have no authority to operate right now. So it's important that if you're so inclined, you should let your congressman know we need this resolved sooner rather than later. And I think I'm walking the fine line there with lobbying as long as I don't tell you how to tell them to resolve it. But we all kind of know what's right. The sad thing about the House version is that it wasn't mean enough to get a broad base of support in the House. So we're going to talk a little bit about owning our definitions and starting to build our own solutions in Indian country with respect to food and self-sufficiency and finance. Since Columbus got here, they've been defining things for us. Everything up to and including what poverty is, what medicine is, what farming is. And it's just our lack of good fortune that we didn't have a written language to memorialize that when the disease came through and killed all of our people who were passing those stories on for more millennia than the Europeans could count. I'm going to start my story with a little bit of frame of reference. Sunday, the 24th of September, I was feeling poorly that morning and told my daughter, Kelsey, I'm not going to be able to ride with you guys because I've had a stomachache all night that kept me up. And some of you know Kelsey, and you know that she's way more hard-headed than I am. And she said, well, if you can't ride, you're going to the hospital. So they took my appendix out, and as I'm sitting there contemplating existence on my tramadol between naps, it occurs to me that there's probably a root or a plant or a flower out there in my yard that my people knew was a cure for what I had. A way less invasive process, but we lost that knowledge. I was really excited to see the youth get up here and present because they're regaining that knowledge. There are 4- and 5-year-old children on the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation that know more about medicinal plants than any of the PhDs in the room. No offense to you, but their parents are teaching it from the very first step. And we're going to get back to where we were, solving all of these problems without such invasive procedures. I also got to thinking about health as a general concept, and healthy and wellness. And I thought about, what if it was a zero-sum game? And what if, in order to take my appendix out and make me more healthy, they had to put it in someone else? And I thought, my God, that would be a bad world to live in. But I got to thinking about this talk I was going to get to give, and that's kind of where we're at with healthy food. So that's one of the first definitions that we want to take back, the definition of healthy food. So what if there was a product that somebody created that could cure, treat, or relieve your suffering when you're ill? How many of you would seek that product out? I see a couple hands. I know there's more of you that would. If I said how many want a Twix, you'd all raise your hand. How many of you would pay more for something like that than you would for something that didn't have that effect on you? I know I sure would. I do every day. But now what if every time you used that product, it indirectly made somebody that you don't even know a little less healthy? Would you still do it? Now, those of us in this room are blessed with those choices. A lot of our people at home do not have that luxury. They have to get whatever shows up on that store shelf from the food systems that are being put upon us. So it's our job out here in the public eye to raise the spectacle of this and talk about the definition and talk about the labels. There are people 3-4 hours east of here that get paid millions and millions of dollars a year to put labels on these things that trigger behaviors in us in an effort to get us to spend our money on them. The one label that I want to talk about is healthy. You know, that product that indirectly makes someone else just a little less healthy? We got it right outside the door here. That Tonka bar is only displacing healthy and nutritious benefits. Might be nutritious, but it's not healthy by my definition. As long as we've got people trying to tell us what's healthy, without us stepping back and examining, where does it come from? How did it get here to me? Did it reap the most benefit for their community where it originated? It's not healthy food. Might be nutritious, and that is a nutritious deal, and it's tasty. And Mark and Carlene, the proprietors of that entity, and I have long drawn-out philosophical discussions about how they can improve their deal. Of course, mine is add some grass-fed beef. We've got a lot of that on the reservations. Mark says it's coming, so I'm very tickled to hear that. But I've talked with Mark and Carlene a lot about it, and why aren't they able to source that product more readily from Indian producers? 22% of the ingredients in that bar out there are sourced from Indians. I don't even know what it costs to buy a Tonka bar. Does anybody know? Faye, are you in here? How much? How much to buy a bar? One bar? 2? $4. All right, there we go. Whole Foods, $4 a bar. I should have pulled it up on Amazon and bought one while I was talking. That would have been good for theatrical effect. So there's a chart that you can look up when you get home and want to do some homework. It's called the food dollar, and it talks about where your food dollar goes. 10 to 14% of your food dollar ever makes it back to the farmer or the rancher or the vegetable grower. All of that other money goes to the marketing, the wholesale guy, the processors. So when you think about that $4 Tonka bar, and I'm going to have to do math right on the spot, and you think about the fact that that's 10% getting back to the producer, that's 40 cents, and then you take 22% of that, that's like 10 cents per bar is getting back to an Indian reservation. Tell me how the hell that's healthy. What gets Tonka bar across the finish line as far as healthy in my estimation, I didn't tell them I was going to have them declared healthy here. They thought I was just going to complain. But Mark and Carlene would get it there if they could. If the products existed that they need to make their bar from wholly sourced Native American products, Mark and Carlene would do it. That's why their office is headquartered on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. So God bless them for their efforts. And let's work on the next step. How do we make sure that Indian producers and the next generation of Indian producers have the ability to provide that product so that we can make the most of this and make all of our food healthy? Mark and Carlene are doing a damn sight better than my reservation is doing. We've got 45,000 head of Native American-owned beef cattle. Some of the best in the country are grown there. And we do not sell any meat that is grown on our reservation in our town, except for what my niece does in her food truck. A couple 100 pounds a month. We've got a tribal grocery store. All of the meat comes off the Nash Finch truck from God knows where. If we are fortunate enough to get some of our product back through that commodity beef system, it has left Cheyenne River, it has went to Kansas, lived there for a year, someone was paid to feed it, then it went over to a slaughter facility where someone was paid to slaughter it and process it, and then we paid someone else to truck it back to Nash Finch Food Center and then back out to our reservation. It's probably got 1,200 extra miles on it when we grow it right there in everybody's backyard. So why don't we just make it into beef? That's the simplest thing. We're going to dive into that here with Occupton and what the shortcoming is in Indian country that keeps this from happening. Since the beginning of time, there has been a need, since the beginning of civilization, there's been a need for money, because it's pretty tough if I owe Faye something to take her a cow. But if I can take her a paper that represents X number of pounds of cow, we can barter and we can trade. So currency was established to facilitate that kind of trade. There's probably an academic in the room that can really straighten me out on that definition, but that's my definition and I own it. So the need for the use of resources owned by someone else to do your thing is almost as old as civilization itself. And there was always someone that had a little bit more resources than the other guy, and he figured out, I can sell him the use of my resources, in exchange for a little bit of profit on my accumulation of resources. Interest. I bet we've all paid a little interest this week, one way or another. I've got a lot of stories that I've accumulated over the last 8 years of people that are paying too much interest with debt that is too poorly structured. And I could give an 8-hour talk on just that. I will highlight a couple examples just to drive the point home. But I want to ideally retire that particular soapbox in December when we roll out our first Occupiton investments. And I reserve the right to drag it back out if we can ever find a regulator that will make these banks do their job. So we're going to talk about commercial banks briefly. That's the Wells Fargo, your Main Street Bank, U.S. Bank. And these are entities that were created by people that had more money than they could put to work. So they established a legal means by which they can sell you the use of their money for interest. And they've kind of got a captive audience. As a general rule, the goal of these commercial creditors is to charge as much for the use of their money as the market will bear. I would say in the case of agriculture, they charge more than the market can possibly bear. Heck, in the case of consumer credit, they do, but we're talking about ag and food systems here today. That's a whole nother conference altogether. Now, because they're charging for the use of this money, they like to be comfortable that they can get their money back. And when you put a lending entity out there into Indian country, rather than mitigate their uncertainty about that environment and learn the processes, learn about the community, they just jack up the interest rate 2 to 4%. So that they can afford to have some things go wrong. But everybody pays for that. And it's, I don't know of a single reservation that I've been to in 8 years of doing this where I haven't heard of a bank charging a usurious interest rate. Another lending entity is a credit union. I bet given the crowd, there's probably a lot of credit union members here. And they're a cooperative, and their goal is to pool money to make more affordable loans to their membership. It's a far better option than these underserved areas. It's a far better option, period, probably, but most of the loan products there look exactly like what the banks do. And they might not be the most suitable product for that consumer that needs it. So risk is another thing that I want to try to redefine. And right now, risk is all put upon the borrower. I don't like that. We're going to change that. Risk, to me, is what happens when the needs of the borrower are not being met by the lender, and it causes an issue with regard to repayment. When profit gets in the way of the cause, you have risk. Credit unions, because they're regulated by the Federal Credit Union Regulation Entity, I'm at a loss for what it is right now, but they're regulated, so they've got to abide by those rules. So they can't get out there and innovate. Because of the lack of ability, the lack of desire, I'll say, of banks to get out there and serve Indian country, there's a new entity that's kind of taken a hold, and it's a community development financial institution. Ross and I went around the country. Ross Racine, my boss at the Intertribal Ag Council, we've been going around the country together for 20 years griping about credit. So finally we were sitting there in a lounge. I don't even remember what town we were in. But I said, it's probably about time we try to put our money where our mouth is, or at least get someone else's money to put where our mouth is. So we applied to the Treasury Department to start a CDFI that will only serve native ag producers and folks in the native food systems. Everything from the soil scientist that wants to start a business to the grocer that wants to put these sourced products on their shelves. That's going to be our target audience. And we are going to build loan products more like investments in those communities. Linda mentioned that I have the good fortune of sitting on the board of directors for Northwest Area Foundation. I asked to be placed on the investment committee there because that's a world that I didn't know about. I was always on the other side of that table. So I've learned a lot there. And one of the things that I've learned is that when philanthropy or people with a significant amount of wealth invest, they pay the people they're investing to manage it. That's how we want to treat our Indian producers. So we want to be able to go out and fundraise from the Ford Foundation, the Walton Foundation, McKnight, Wells Fargo, and say, hey, invest in Indian country. We're going to reinvest that out in the community. We're going to be your representative out in the field. We're going to act like your investment house. Because when these entities put their money with JP Morgan gets 1.25% of the amount, plus an incentive if they do well. I don't know a single producer of corn, squash, cattle, buffalo, or rutabaga that couldn't make that deal work, to get paid to put that money to work. So that's what Akiptan hopes to be, is that vehicle through which folks with resources can invest in Indian country. Instead of us being their charity case, we can be looked at as an investment. Give you one example of how we hope to do that. Instead of a loan, we're going to do an investment to a producer. Instead of a $100,000 loan at 7.5% or 8%, like the typical bank will do, we're going to start to talk to the producers and the store owners and the food truck operators about, we want to invest this, and we're interested in the return on investment that you can provide us. So let's take a loan, for example, of $100,000. You get that amortized over 7 years at 7%, you're going to pay about $23,000 to the bank. In our model, we're going to say, hey, you give us a 10% return on our investment and maintain this relationship that we've got. So that's $10,000 from the producer's pocket to our deal instead of $23,000 to $25,000 to the bank. That puts money in their pocket that they can put in a savings account for the next year for operating expenses. Maybe they can borrow their operating capital with that as security instead of having to pledge the whole damn farm just to get money to operate and grow the next crop. To my knowledge, nobody's ever thought of doing this before. And if anybody knows of one that has and doesn't work, let me know so we can learn from that and make it work. But we really feel like we can reinvent this thing, and it's ripe for reinvention. The average age of the farmer or rancher in this nation is 58. I found a study online a couple days ago that says the average age of the human on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is 60. The life expectancy. So there's a crisis there. Since 1990, the average farm debt has increased by 4.1% per year. There I've got to do some more math on the spot, but I wrote this one out. That amounts to 112% more farm debt now than there was in 1990. I think it was John F. Kennedy that said the farmer is the only man that buys everything at retail and sells everything at wholesale. The price of fuel has doubled or tripled since then. The price of the vehicles they need to do these things has went up by a factor of 3 or 4. None of the finance vehicles that they're using have improved or changed to meet the times. We feel like we can start this model in Indian country by doing lending like Indians would do it. By sharing our resources in a way that's relevant and respectful to our culture, and show how we can change this thing nationwide, not just in Indian country. Another fact that comes into play here is the suicide rate of farmers and ranchers is at an all-time high. Something isn't right. So let's stop trying to do the same damn thing over and over and over again and start to look for new solutions. The commercial banks have had their chance. When you talk about risk pools and lending, the riskiest of pools are typically served by the federal government. Farm Service Agency loans, SBA loans, what have you. Then there's the pool that's just a little less risky by their definition. Guarantee products have been developed. The federal government will guarantee loans made to that population. 90% guarantee. So the bank's risk is really only 10% of the loan. It's really not even that much when you figure that the bank is going to sell the guaranteed portion on the secondary market a week after they make it and have the money to loan again. But still, there are communities that go underserved. My community goes underserved. And of course, the commercial credit, the downtown bank here has the easy loans to make. And we've got these CDFIs that were created to serve the folks that are out there in the deepest of the waters. And right now, the way this situation sits, in order to get access to capital, these CDFIs have to try to act like a bank to get at these guarantee products that don't do what the hell they were designed to do anyway. My good friend Tawny Brunch over at Lakota Fund has to do things just like an FSA lender or a bank to get an FSA guarantee on her lending. So what we're working on is trying to develop our own guarantee that's unique to the innovative strategies that we want to deploy. And if we can get a guarantee on those type of investments in Indian country, we're going to have a pretty good shot at raising some funds from the philanthropic sector, from the corporate sector, because they're more and more becoming aware of the need to do some good because the labels they're putting on our food aren't quite getting it done for some of them anymore. One example of a guarantee program that went wrong is the Section 184 HUD Guaranteed Loan Program. Now that was designed to get banks to do home mortgages on trust land. I know for a fact because my old man was on the negotiated rulemaking committee when that came to pass. That was the intention. Now, more than 90% of the loans made through that program are on non-trust land because the banks got the regulations changed to suit them so they could discriminate even worse against Indian people by saying, hey, it's not about the land anymore, you're just an Indian. So every time I run into my friend at First Tribal Lending or Bank 2, I always make sure I give them some hell about that because that's offensive to me. Because if it was about the trust land and your uncertainty about that and you don't have trust land as a factor anymore, you treat those people every bit as damn good as you do your other customers. So how is this going to lead to self-sufficiency? Well, I think it's pretty clear, but I've got some time left, so I'll go ahead and say it. The sum total of the American Indian agriculture industry is about $3.4 billion a year by virtue of the 2012 ag census. The new one's rolling out soon. We hope the number goes up, but with the decline in ag prices, maybe not. But we'll just use 3.4 billion because it's the only number I know. The sum total of the federal government's estimation of its obligation to Indian country through Indian Health Service appropriations and BIA appropriations That's what the government owes us for all of the land on this continent that was taken. They figure it's about $8.5, $9 billion a year. Let's think about that food dollar as it relates to that $3.4 billion number. That represents 10%. If we multiply that by 10, we're at $34 billion if we get all of our products turned into food before it leaves our reservation. And we've got to start somewhere. So I say let's all start tomorrow when we get home. Figure out how we can do that. Talk to a neighbor. Call someone from a reservation. Say, hey, I understand you guys grow cattle out there. How do I go about getting some of that directly from you? Because who the hell knows what I'm getting from Nash Finch or even Whole Foods? You know that burger you get at Whole Foods? You want to know how many cows go into making that 1 pound package of hamburger you're getting there? You don't. But if you get right in touch with a producer, there's some grass-fed producers right within the community here. You can know where your cow came from, you can know what's been done to it, and you can rest assured that you're eating healthy food that is providing the maximum economic benefit to that community of origin. And that's all I got for you. Thank you very much for your time and attention. It's been an honor.